Thank you again to Dan for the invitation. I was here a year ago. In between, much has happened, but it's really good to be with you again. The title of what I want to say is, Does God Forget? So since we already know the answer to that, I could just go and sit down. But I'd like to explain a little bit more why I chose that title. And I think there's a few pictures or a few slides. I'll just, And I want to talk about the story of the rich man and Lazarus. And we'll read this story in a few minutes from Luke chapter 16. But first of all, I want to give you thanks. The mission that we're involved in, we're based in Eastern Europe in a country called Slovakia, but which we've been there for 35 years. But about 25 years ago, we began branching out and engaging in projects in various parts of the world. Africa, Middle East, and more recently in Ukraine. And I wanted to give thanks to Westminster Chapel. You may or may not know it, but there's an organization in Canada called MSC, which is the international mission arm of the assemblies across Canada. And working together with MSC, just one example, we've been able to provide life-saving humanitarian support, mostly food and heating, to over 400,000 people in Ukraine, working with over 50 local churches in different communities, and MSC in Westminster has been part of that. So I'd like to give you thanks on behalf of the people of Ukraine. Thank you for your prayers for them, and we need to continue to think about them as this senseless conflict continues. And we also realize from our prayers today that we live in a broken world. Seems brokener all the time. And every day we have new stories of death and senseless conflict and destruction, suffering. And I think, how do I, as a very rich person from a very rich place, Canada, living most of my time in a just slightly less rich place, Slovakia, so part of the EU, how do I think about life in a broken world? Do I block it out? Do I just feel guilty? Do I sell everything and give it away? Do I jump on an airplane and go somewhere to do something? Or go to the front and shoot the bad guys? You know, you see all this kind of response. Or just like most of us, and sometimes me, feel paralyzed. There's nothing that can be done. It seems that no matter what's done, the world remains broken. And so the story of the rich man and Lazarus, I think, gives us some clues to how to live in the realities of the world that we're in today. So I'd like to read this story. It's in Luke chapter 16, verse 19. And it reads like this: There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores, and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his wounds. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was in torment, the rich man looked up, saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, Father Abraham, have pity on me. Send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water, cool my tongue, because I'm in agony in this fire. But Abraham replied, Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, while Lazarus received bad things. But now he's comforted and you're in agony. And besides all this, between us and you, there's a great chasm that has been set in place, so that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us. The rich man answered, Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my family, for I have 5 brothers. Take note of that. 5 brothers. Let him warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment. Abraham said, They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them. No, Father Abraham, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent. He said, If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead. We'll come back to that in a minute. But keep it in your mind. Okay, the story is Lazarus sat at the gates of the rich. We don't know if he was there for a long time or whether he showed up a few days earlier. He waited for leftovers from the table. He watched the rich man's friends walking through the gate, hoping in a few hours he'd get the scraps. Tradition says that Lazarus was leprous, was a leper, this sores. And the common view then was that people who were leprous were so because of their sin or the sin of their parents. So it's his problem, he deserves it, it's not my fault, which is a really helpful hypothesis in order to preserve peace of mind in a broken world. Leviticus 13 says, Let the leper cry all the time, unclean, unclean. Can you imagine going through life, not only with the affliction, but needing to cry out, unclean, which basically means stay away from me. We don't know if he had a place to live, but he had no choice to go out among people for his survival. And what is interesting is that everyone at that time thought the situation was completely normal. Everyone wanted to be invited to the feast. Everyone would accept the invitation. Everyone thought it was normal. Those who feasted, those who walked by, even Lazarus thought this is just the way things are. Everyone thought it was normal except Jesus. This is the only parable in which a character has a name. Did you know that? Lazarus. Of all the parables Jesus told, only one gave a name. And Lazarus was the one that got the name. He had a name, but he didn't speak throughout the entire story. The rich man, who had, by the way, no name in this story, never stopped talking. Normally, we know the names of the rich and the powerful. Elon Musk, Bill Gates. People like Lazarus, we don't worry about their names. But Jesus said there was a certain poor man named Lazarus. The rich man, he knew Lazarus by name. He asked Abraham to send him. He couldn't argue, oh, I didn't know he was there. I didn't know him. No, he definitely knew who Lazarus was. And the rich man had 2 requests from Abraham. Neither request was granted. The first request, send him to cool my tongue with a drop of water. Abraham said, no, you had your life. I'm sorry. The second request, and the second reason was there's a great gap between us. They were close, they were proximate in life, but after life, there was a great gap. So the rich man reconciled himself to his destiny, that he wouldn't get help himself, but his second request, please send Lazarus to warn my 5 brothers not to come here. And Abraham said, they've already been warned. We'll return to this later. So how to understand all this? In a way, this story is simple, almost, I would say, primitive. Okay? Rich people go to hell, poor people go to heaven. That's the way it should be. We all relate to the poor, so happy, happy, happy. That's why the story is so popular, because it's so simple. People identify themselves as with the poor, with the needy. But it's interesting how much this story has entered into our culture. You see a piece of art. There's one more. You can move to the next slide. Did you know that someone did a PhD on this? They looked at all the medieval art in the world and which parable was represented the most often. It's this one. It's the most popular parable at least in Western culture, as it's reflected in art. And the next slide, what I find absolutely remarkable, the English composer Vaughan Williams wrote a symphony about the life of a leper who lived almost 2,000 years ago and showed up in the story of Jesus. Can you imagine, why would someone write a symphony about that? Bono, U2, wrote a story, Crumbs from My Table. David Bowie's last song he wrote in his life was about Lazarus. This story keeps resurfacing again and again and again. The context of this story is absolutely fascinating. Well, let me say one more thing about how it entered into our culture. Some of you might have been on the Adriatic coast, a city named Dubrovnik. Has anyone ever been there? Okay, just outside the walls of Dubrovnik is a place called the Lazaret. It was the first place in history to set up quarantine for seafarers. They had to spend, if they came from another place, they had to spend 60 days in the Lazaret before they could enter the city. The first instance of quarantine in our culture. Interesting name they gave it, isn't it? In other words, stay far away from us, Lazarus. Stay far away. Now, Josephus, who was a Jewish historian, says that the rich man in the story was the great priest, Caiaphas. He was known to wear linen and purple robes. He had 5 brothers, namely his father-in-law Annas had 5 sons. They had daily festivities in their palace. He was the ultimate political insider, the supreme power broker. Jesus, just before he told the story of Lazarus, had finished a parable against the Pharisees about an unjust steward, which ended with the punchline, you cannot serve God and money. The Pharisees, who loved money, scoffed at him because their worldview says the reason we are rich is because God is pleased with us. So, and then right away, Jesus went on to tell the story of Lazarus. So the people who heard the story would have heard, please send Lazarus to the house of my father, Annas, and my 5 brothers, the sons of Annas. So the hearers of the time would have immediately connected this story with the high priest and his family, who are the absolute dominant family. And if you go to the next slide, something absolutely amazing. This was a high priest and his sons and his son-in-law who ruled over the people of Israel from AD 6 until after AD 43. This one family held power for that entire time. Already, when Jesus was speaking, they had already been in control for almost 25 years. And so Jesus opens up and he says, well, there's this person, ruler, feast, 5 brothers. Everyone would have thought, okay, this is getting a little close. And sure enough, just after this parable, the Pharisees, the rulers, decided Jesus has to go. So that's when they began the conspiracy that he needed to die. Why? Not because they thought he was teaching falsehoods, but because he was threatening their power. And it's absolutely fascinating that you see then later on the story of another Lazarus, if you remember. What other Lazarus is there in the Gospels? Mary and Martha's brother. Lived in Bethany, named Lazarus, died. Jesus rose him from the dead. Because he rose from the dead, the Pharisees said, this man also needs to die. So poor Lazarus, he dies, raised from the dead, and then they say we have to kill him again. And connect that to what Jesus told in the story. Okay, please send someone back from the dead to warn my brothers. Someone named Lazarus came back from the dead, warned them, and the brothers decided he needs to be killed. So you see this interplay. This parable is deeply soaked in the power politics of the time and the deep injustices that were being perpetrated on poor people like Lazarus. So the story was very real and raw and sensitive to the people. And as after Jesus told this story, as I said, the rulers of the day decided he needed to go. Now, the amazing thing about all of this was that the reason they decided Jesus needed to die was because if they didn't control him, the Romans would come and take away our place. They had equated their position of power with God's nation, which usually, when that happens, ends badly. So the question that we can ask now is, what does this have to do with how we're living and the problem of pain in the world? What was the story, the point of the story Jesus was trying to make? The issue wasn't that there was a rich man. Jesus said, you've enjoyed good things in your life. These weren't bad things. And the condemnation wasn't because of the richness. The condemnation was because he'd neglected Lazarus at his gate. It's clear that there was a forgetfulness. Okay, God has given me good things. What do I do with it? And I think what Jesus was condemning in this story was not rich and poor, but the thing that he was condemning was, you've forgotten that all you have, you've received from someone. That all you have is a gift. You didn't decide where you would be born, into what family, whether healthy or with a handicap, what gender. You didn't decide I didn't decide to be born privileged white male in a Western country. All of that is a gift. So what do you do with the gift that you've received? If you get into the frame of mind that, okay, all I have is mine, self-made man, okay, no obligation to others. I think that's what Jesus was talking about in this story. So if we get into the position of thinking, of forgetting that all I have is a gift, and therefore it's incumbent on me to give further. If we lose that frame of mind, then we're in no position to help with the pain of the world. So I think this is the point of the story, that God says, all that is mine and yours. The rich man had forgotten this profound truth. He said, all I have is mine. I use my wealth to strengthen my political position. I only invite those who help me in life. Why help Lazarus? He's of no use to me. This was the attitude of the rich man. Now, what does that mean to us? If you move to the next slide, one of the initiatives I've been involved in that I'd ask for your prayers, I'm the chairman of a group of about 22 international relief and development organizations that have opened up a campaign called Neglected Crises. So there's so much on the news and so much pain that we just can't keep up with it. We want to forget. But we've identified 12 different nations where there's crises that are ongoing, that are deep, usually the cause of conflict, where people suffer and they just get forgotten. And one of the things we thought would be good to do, okay, and it was inspired by this story of Lazarus. Does God forget? God doesn't forget any of these crises. In these countries that are listed there, there's almost 172 million people who are displaced, and almost all of them are food insecure. So I'm always reluctant to use these big numbers because it's numbing. 172 million. I can't get my mind around that. I can't get my mind around 2 million. What can you do with 172 million needy people? The first thing I do when I see these numbers is that to remind myself that God knows the name of each of the 172 million, just like he knew the name of Lazarus. God knows the name of each child who unnecessarily died far too young. That child already had a name in her mother's womb, just as Lazarus had a name. Because giving to try and help solve these problems is never about whether we can give enough. Who could ever give enough? It's an expression of the profound truth that we give because God first gave to us. We give because we're gifted. That all I have is a gift. So we're not asked to fix the mess of the world. We're only asked not to forget about the mess, just as God does not forget. So I'd like to again thank you for your part, ask you to pray for those in these neglected, forgotten places, and to keep in mind, okay, Lazarus, he had a name. Everyone up here has a name, and we're all part of this same humanity, just as responsible as the rich man was in his day. So, God bless you. Thank you for the chance to be with you. Amen.